All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Honors College Honors Lecture Series devoted to climate change this semester. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips, and I'm the Associate Dean of the Honors College. Dr. John Weil, who is Dean of the Honors College, regrets that he can't be here today, but he wanted to send his greetings. He's very supportive of this series. So I would like to invite Dr. Mary Evans to the front to introduce our speaker. Dr. Evans is one of our resident faculty members in the Honors College. She is a research associate professor of history, and she is the director of our American Democracy Project on this campus. And as I mentioned before, one of the big reasons why we're having the Civic Summit here at MTSU. So welcome, Dr. Evans.
Our speaker today, the Honorable Larry Harrington, is an attorney in Nashville with Harrington Law. He most recently served for 5 years as Deputy Attorney General of the state of Tennessee. Previously, he was representative of the Inter-American Development Bank in Mexico City. He has twice been appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the U.S. Senate as United States Executive Director of the Inter-American Development Bank. Mr. Harrington has several roles in the past in Albert Gore Jr.'s congressional, Senate, and vice presidential campaigns. Harrington was political director of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and legal counsel to Al Gore during Vice President Gore's, then Senator Gore's years in the United States Senate. Mr. Harrington was deputy campaign manager of Mr. Gore's first campaign for President of the United States, for which Harrington oversaw the campaign's Super Tuesday strategy. He was also senior advisor for the presidential campaign bid of Vietnam War vet, former Navy SEAL, Nebraska Governor, and U.S. Senator Bob Kerrey when he attempted to run for president. Mr. Harrington is a faculty member at Vanderbilt University's Center for Latin American Studies, and is a founding advisory board member of the Mexico Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, where he was also a scholar in residence after his tenure in Washington in the Clinton-Gore administration. He taught law and ethics at Belmont University's Graduate School of Business in Nashville. A fluent Spanish speaker, he has lectured on U.S. elections at the respected Center for Research of Higher Education in Mexico City, and commented on U.S. elections on Mexico City radio and television. Very much still politically engaged, he's married to Lisa Quigley, who is the chief of staff of Nashville's U.S. Congressman Jim Cooper. He just this month did political commenting on the Iowa caucuses for radio and television. Mr. Harrington is one of us. He is an MTSU alum. He earned his bachelor's degree from this university and then went from here to Vanderbilt University Law School. After earning his JD from Vanderbilt, Harrington clerked for a United States district judge and worked for the New York law firm Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood. And then his career took off within geopolitical circles. His close personal and professional association through the years with Tennessee's own environmental leader and our own Obi-Wan Kenobi, Vice President Al Gore, has put Mr. Harrington in the middle of major environmental decisions and discussions in the decision-making center. Two, his business connections with global gas and oil have placed him in the center of environmental policymaking. He is co-founder, he is not, but the co-founder and founding CEO and first president of the Land Trust for Tennessee and the former Environmental Protection Agency General Counsel, Attorney Jeannie Nelson, who is a friend of his, reintroduced Mr. Harrington to MTSU as our own distinguished alum, and said that he would be the appropriate person to discuss the politics of climate change with this university. He would bring us an insider's political perspective about an ongoing problem, a nasty political issue, and a pressing geopolitical and global need. So MTSU, please give a welcome to Mr. Larry Harrington, the politics of climate change.
Thanks very much. I want to start off, first I want to start off by thanking Dr. Evans, Mary, for that introduction. I don't do as many of these presentations as I used to. I used to enjoy going around the country because, you give people a piece of paper and they'd say all those nice things about you that you wrote. So it's always nice to go out and give speeches and have people give you nice introductions. I very much appreciate being here. MTSU has changed a little since I was here in the previous century. It's a lot bigger, a lot more diverse, which is good. Carbon footprint is a lot bigger, I think, so that's maybe not so good. Hopefully they're doing some things to ameliorate that. I want to kind of tell you a little bit about what I'm going to say and what I'm not going to say. Well, I'm going to talk about the politics of climate change. And by the way, climate change and global warming are going to get used interchangeably. There's some reasons why that shouldn't happen, but it's going to happen. Climate change really refers to the bigger phenomenon. Global warming sounds kind of specific, and but we're going to use them interchangeably. I'm going to try to say climate change, but sometimes the presentation, and sometimes I will say global warming, but we're talking about the big phenomena. So I'm going to talk about the politics of it, and I'm going to talk more about the domestic politics than the international politics. International politics are very important. All of you have heard of the big UN meetings that started as early as 1992 in Rio, and most recently ended in, there was one recently that ended in December in Madrid, the Paris Agreement a couple of years before. So you're familiar with those big international UN meetings where the countries negotiate their positions on climate change. I'm not going to get into that because I want to talk more about domestic politics, because domestic politics has a huge impact on that process. If the United States is not leading, if we're not taking a position of leadership in those international multilateral fora, then a lot is not going to happen. And you saw that most recently, the Madrid meeting, COP25 it's called, COP25 it's called, didn't end particularly well. It did not meet its goals of establishing some better rules of the road for how countries can report and how we can move resources to developing countries that need resources to deal with climate change and to mitigate the results. And that's basically the politics, the international politics around global warming, just to close out. It's basically we and Western Europe and China and Japan, Australia, some other very developed countries. China's a little bit in the middle, but it emits a lot of greenhouse gases. You know, we've gotten where we are because we emitted a lot of greenhouse gases over the years. And there are a lot of developing countries, Nigeria, Brazil, India, for example, that want to reach our level of development, but they can't do that if they're not emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, or if they're not spending a lot of money to keep those gases from being emitted by going to renewables and other forms of energy production. So the big debate is, how do you balance that? And we try to cut, the more developing countries try to cut their emissions. We try to encourage the developing countries to cut their emissions, but in order to do that, especially the poorer of those countries want resources, some transfer of resources to help them do that, transfer of technology to help them do that. And then there's another group of nations like the island nations, the Maldives and others. They not only need technology to help them deal with their emissions, which really aren't that great, the sea is coming over them, and they need financing and resources to deal with the immediate impact right now of rising sea levels. So those are the issues that get negotiated in multilateral forum. It's an extremely challenging process, and nothing happens there if the U.S. doesn't lead. And when the U.S. signals that it's pulling out of an agreement, as we did with Paris, then things kind of fall apart. So what I want to talk about and focus on more is where the U.S. is and why we aren't leading, and where the politics, the domestic politics of climate change are. And I'd like to start with this slide here, and I'd really like to ask you guys to help me by, and I was going to do this anonymously on a piece of paper, but I decided I'm going to put you on the spot and let you raise your hand. What I would like to do, we got three, it's perception of what scientists believe about global warming. And I think the reason, this is the Gallup organization, which you've all probably heard of. They're a pretty well respected survey research organization, been around a long time. They asked this question this way, I believe, because they perceive that most people feel like global warming is an awfully complex issue. They haven't had the advantage of being in a class like this where you learn a lot about it. They learn some from the news, they learn some from Facebook. So they don't really may not feel empowered to answer what seems to be asking them their scientific questions. The scientific question. The question is asked is, what is your perception of what scientists believe? So what I'd like to do is put you guys on the spot and just your impression. Which one of the following statements do you think is most accurate? And so here's the first one. Most scientists believe that global warming is occurring. How many believe that statement is true? Most scientists believe that global warming is occurring. Does anybody believe that that most scientists believe that global warming is not occurring? And does anybody believe that most scientists are unsure? Okay, well, we've got a somewhat overweighted towards the belief that global warming is occurring, but I think we have to respect, and one of the challenges that we have in the current political debate is kind of understanding where people come from when they express skepticism about global warming, or if they express skepticism not so much about global warming, but about the scientists or the media outlets or the individuals who are saying that global warming is a challenge. Y'all are more...
So with that poll you showed, was that climate scientists or was that scientists in general?
Scientists who specialize in... Well, the question referred to scientists in general, so that was the way it was phrased. Americans' attitudes on global warming, y'all are a little beyond the curve there. We've got most Americans say that scientists believe global warming is occurring. And an almost equally large group say that it is 64% believe it's caused by human activity, 60% believe it's already occurring, and global warming will occur in their lifetime and then worry a great deal about global warming. So I kind of want to I'd like to ask you a couple of these. How many of you think that the effects of global warming are already occurring? And how many of you believe it will pose a serious problem in your lifetime? Well, considering your age cohort, you should. It's already occurring, of course. Regardless, frankly, of whether you believe it's caused by human activity or not, it's occurring. And if you're young, like you guys are, then it's definitely going to occur in your lifetime. Worry a great deal about global warming. I kind of like to ask you that too. How many of you worry a great deal about global warming? A lot, not quite as many. I think that's a hard question. You know, I worry a great deal about it some days, and other days I don't worry about it. I was preparing this presentation, I had to put a family pet down, you know, and I'll tell you the day that happened, I didn't worry at all about global warming. I was totally thinking about something else. So it's an interesting question, and I think we all think about it a lot, but whether we worry about it a lot, that's another issue. When we get into the different opinions on global warming, I thought this was an interesting slide because it captures a group where probably a lot of people are, probably a lot of your parents and some of your friends, some of the folks you go to church with, that sort of thing are, and that's in that mixed middle. We got concerned believers. That's, somewhere in the somewhere in the 50% range, and that means people who really do worry about it a little bit every day or almost every day. And then you got people who really pretty much don't think it is a problem, and that's around 20%. They don't think it's a problem. They probably don't think it's human activity has anything to do with it. And then you got folks in the mixed middle, and that mixed middle in this survey and reading how they ask the question, that's people who believe it's happening, believe something's happening. They don't necessarily believe humans caused it. they're kind of like this. There's something going on out there, but I don't fully understand it. And I sure don't know what's causing it, and that's the mixed middle. I think that's where a fair number of people are. However, and you could see it on the previous slide, you could see here how attitudes have changed and moved around over the years. The next slide is probably the most instructive about how attitudes have begun to change. And this is getting into the hardcore politics of the presentation. And as you can see, there is a huge partisan gap between Democrats and Republicans in terms of worry a great deal about global warming or climate change. Now, again, we all know that we don't worry every day about it, unless you live in the Maldives or maybe at Miami Beach. But we do, Democrats apparently, worry more about it. They're willing to say they worry a great deal about it. Independents fall as they probably should right in the middle, and Republicans way down here. But you can see that hasn't always been the case. In 2007, there were fewer Democrats, but there were more in the middle, but there were a few more Republicans. Not a whole lot more, but a few more. Back here, there were even more. And what happened was between 2007 and 2010, 11, the numbers dropped off, both for Republicans and Democrats. We had a financial crisis and a recession, right? That probably had a lot to do with it. But the parties started diverging on it. How many of you know who Newt Gingrich is? Have you heard of Newt Gingrich? That's pretty good. Newt Gingrich was the Republican Speaker of the House who came in as Speaker in 1995. Republicans took over the Congress in 1994 in that election. He was made Speaker in 1995 and served for a few years. He was controversial, he was intense, very smart guy. I met him actually. He and Al Gore worked together on an issue. When I worked for Al Gore, I used to meet with Newt Gingrich about a kind of a wonky scientific issue. He's a smart enough guy. He's become sort of a talking head and a very conservative kind of, I can't think of another word except bombastic, and that's kind of negative, and I don't necessarily mean it that way, but he's out there. He and Nancy Pelosi, I assume everybody knows who Nancy Pelosi is, right? Okay. He and Nancy Pelosi sat together on a couch in a video ad made for TV and said, basically, we don't agree on much, but we agree that global warming or climate change is a real significant issue, and we need to work together to deal with that problem. And in the 2008 election, the Republican platform basically said, yeah, global warming, climate change is a problem, and we need to do something on it. But from 2008 on, Republican attitudes, as you can see, while they were never particularly high, they took a nosedive and have never really moved up significantly. And we kind of know where the current administration is. There are some Republican office holders, governors, the governors of the states of Maryland, Vermont, and Massachusetts, who are considerably beyond where their party is in terms of believing that global warming is a significant issue. But generally speaking, this is where we are in terms of the party distribution on the issue. Let me diverge here and say, whether you're Republican or Democrat, if you're young, like you guys are, you're more likely to believe that it's a problem. And this is true within the Republican Party as well. And as a matter of fact, it's the only cohort, the only group within the Republican Party that believes that global warming is a significant problem is the 18 to 24, or I'm sorry, 18 to 30, maybe slice and dice different ways, but basically the younger cohort within the Republican Party does believe that it's a significant problem. And this is just really kind of another way of looking at the issue. Probably the one takeaway from this is this 18 to 34 global warming is caused by human activities, because that kind of gets to the core of, if it's caused by human activities, then we humans got to do something about it. If it's just weather, if it's just the plan, that's the way it's going to happen, then there's not much we can do about it. And so humans don't really have a responsibility. But if you think humans have a responsibility, 75% of 18 to 34-year-olds, then you're going to be more inclined to see policy decisions by your government, federal, state, local, to do something about it. And again, the issue on what scientists believe, and again, whether or not it's already occurring. I was a little surprised that 82%, and fairly large across the board, understand global warming issue, think they understand the global warming issue pretty well. I think some people overestimate their abilities, but because I don't think I mean, there's some parts of it I think I understand, but as you know, and as you're finding out in the course of this study, that it's a complex issue. Among the parties, the distribution, the different cohort groups among the parties, I thought this was probably one of the more interesting slides, and one of the more interesting phenomenon out there, and it has to do with the levels of education. So if you've got a group within the Republican Party that's pretty skeptical about global warming, what happens here? It's worry a great deal about global warming. High school or less, 23%, some college, 11%, college graduate, 8%. The lowest among is, generally speaking, global warming is caused by natural changes in the environment. Again, the largest group there. Global warming will never happen, still, well, slightly larger. And global warming will pose a serious threat to your way of life in your lifetime. High school or less, the less educated Republicans believe that more than educated. And that gets into something I want to talk about, which is how we divide ourselves in issues and how we sort of self-select and how we use our intelligence to reconfirm our opinions. There's a book that recently came out, which I'm going to recommend to you, by a guy named Ezra Klein. It's called Why We're Polarized. He also does podcasts, and so I know y'all got plenty of reading to do, and if you want to go listen to a podcast, he's also going to be in Nashville in April. I recommend this to you, and like I say, really, you can, for those of you that are commuters, just get the podcast, and that's, you can, but I'm sure he'd like for you to buy his book. But he's got some really interesting data in there, and talks about some really interesting studies about why we're polarized. And one of these things, one of the issues that he looks at, or one of the studies he looks at, deals with this problem. He talks about it in the book in the context of global warming, climate change, is that people tend to use their intelligence, in this case their education, to reinforce the beliefs they already have. And he cites a study there that someone did with a math problem, a fairly complicated math problem. You had to be kind of good in math. I probably couldn't have done it. You had to be kind of good in math to work through it. And they gave them one problem, and kind of confirmed that they were pretty good in math and they could work through these math problems. And it was then they gave them a question, a mathy question that dealt with gun control. And what they basically found was that the smart math folks, if they believed in gun control, then they did a really good job and used their math skills to confirm, what they believed. If they didn't believe in gun control, they did just the opposite. In other words, they used their math skills to reconfirm their opinions. If the math didn't work for their opinion, they got it wrong. In other words, their math skills failed them if it didn't confirm the pre-existing opinion that they went into the project with. So I think that's probably what happens here. And by the way, I do think Democrats and liberals, and I think everybody's guilty to some extent, particularly in this environment where I can, in about 3 minutes, even with my limited skills, I can find something on the internet to support my point of view. And if you come to the debate or the issue with a preconceived notion, and you tend to, but you're educated, you're looking for information. But where do you go for information? You go to the news, but you probably go to certain news sources that are fair and balanced. You go to the internet, or you go to certain radio programs and you get a lot of confirmation about your point of view. And by the way, you know, climate deniers and climate scientists who don't agree with 97%, more or less, of their counterparts, they're not stupid people. They have a different point of view, but they're trained scientists and they can put together a pretty interesting, assemble a good bit of interesting data and make a decent argument on the other side. And if you enter into that argument already believing that global warming or climate change isn't really a problem, then you're going to find that data and it's going to reinforce your opinion. So I think that's why we are where we are with this particular data point. And I don't think it's because people are dishonest or stupid. I think it's just because people tend to go look for information and use their intelligence to reinforce views that already exist. And one of the things that influences political opinion, as I think probably we here in the South know more than anybody, more than others in some other parts of the country, are religious beliefs. And I know that, and there is a debate within various religious communities regarding climate change. So I thought it was interesting and important if we're going to talk about politics. There are two things I did a lecture in Mexico City last year on the elections, and you know, you can't talk about politics in the United States unless you talk about race and religion. I mean, the two R's are really fundamental to politics in this country. Race, especially in the South. Well, no, not especially in the South, all over the country. And religion, perhaps more especially in the South because of our concentration of evangelicals. So what we have here is some interesting data, I think, regarding where folks of different religious persuasions are in terms of, again, the perceptions of scientific consensus on climate change. So the question is, the percentage of adults who think scientists generally agree or do not agree that the Earth is getting warmer due to human activity. And human activity, again, it's important to get that in there because when you're dealing with folks in the religious community, the issue as to whether this is something that's just happening or whether we are contributing to it is an important part of the question. And so what do you get? You get scientists do not agree. U.S. adults 37, 57, so almost 2/3, 1/3, not quite, distribution there between don't agree versus agree. Net Protestant, little more leaning towards scientists don't agree. White evangelical, 47% believe that scientists don't agree that the Earth is getting warmer due to human activity. That's really the only, of all these, it's the only group, the only cohort that's a plurality, almost a majority, who are quite skeptical that scientists agree that global warming is caused by human activity, that the Earth is getting warmer and it's caused by human activity. And you get some real interesting black Protestants who, many of whom I think probably are also evangelical, but they're not there at all. They're back really more where the majority is in terms of agreeing that scientists generally agree that the Earth is getting warmer due to human activity. And Hispanics even more so, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I screwed that up again. Sorry about that. And another interesting, Catholics, little more divergence there. The Pope Francis at least, has been more out there, more concerned about climate change. So that's I think an interesting because it defines, race and religion greatly define where we are on the political spectrum and which party we tend to identify with. The parties these days, and this gets into a larger discussion and probably one I don't want to get off in too much because we're going to run out of time, but parties are very much, we're not only polarized, the parties are very different creatures these days. The Democratic Party, when I was at MTSU, we had, and I was in Young Democrats here, and we had really very conservative folks in the Young Democrats, and we had more liberal folks and some really liberal folks. So we had folks who, really didn't agree much with the National Democratic Party and, didn't like George McGovern and Walter Mondale and, Jimmy Carter maybe a little bit, but not that much. But they still identified as Democrats. And that was true. That was true in Young Democrats here, and it was true in the state legislature, and it was true in the United States Congress. That's really that's not true anymore. The parties have gone their separate ways, and the Democratic Party, which is still somewhat more of a umbrella party than the Republican Party, but it's certainly moved to the left, and the Republican Party has moved more to the right. The Democratic Party is somewhat more diverse. The largest affiliation, religious affiliation in the Democratic Party is non-affiliated. The largest affiliation in the Republican Party is white Protestant, and that's by a decent margin. So the parties are very different, and that perception or that phenomena has a lot to do with where people end up on issues such as global warming. This is just we needed a picture, so Pope Francis, this refers to his Laudato Si is the paper that he put out a year or two ago regarding climate change, which is, and then this is, y'all are going to talk about religion, as I said, later in this course, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but there is a significant movement out there in the evangelical community, kind of generally around the concept of caring for creation and caring for what God has given us. And I'm trying to segue into some more positive messages here, because I think the message I've been giving so far is that it's really hard to get anything done on climate change and domestic politics because we are very divided, we are very polarized. We sort on climate change immediately into our groups, and we have a federal government, which is pretty much ground to a halt as a consequence of that polarization, because we now have a House of Representatives controlled by the Democratic Party. We have a Republican president. We have a Republican Senate, and the Supreme Court, as a consequence of the Senate and the presidency being in the hands of the Republicans, the Supreme Court, and certainly the rest of the judiciary is trending certainly more conservative. And yet, at the same time, when you look at the vote totals, the total number of votes cast in House of Representative races, the total number of votes cast in Senate races, and the total number of votes cast in the presidential race, you see that, in fact, we are in a situation where we actually have a minoritarian control of the country, and that makes it a very difficult situation in terms of getting anything done. Checks and balances were great. Our founding fathers didn't believe in parties. They hoped we wouldn't have political parties, and now that we have two political parties that are more polarized than ever, it is very difficult to get things done. Nancy Pelosi and no other Republican are going to sit on the same couch together, and it's not going to be like it was between Reagan and the Speaker of the House back then. They went out and had a beer and took care of a big problem over Social Security. That doesn't happen anymore. So it's very difficult to get anything done on global warming. But as people see global warming affecting them in their community, and people are beginning to see global warming affecting them in their community, they're beginning to see environmental issues affecting them in their community. Sometimes if you talk about global warming, people say, I don't know, that's not. But is the stream polluted? Is the air bad? Are there local environmental issues that are affecting me? Yeah, there are, and we need to do something about it. So the regional differences are important. In the United States, I thought it was interesting. Here in the South, if you ask about global warming, Southerners tend to be more skeptical. But if you ask them about protecting land, air, water, et cetera, they're basically where the rest of the country is. And actually on that survey, a point or two more concerned than Midwesterners for some reason. Don't know if it's statistically significant. Another data point that heads us in a direction that, look, I know we're polarized on these issues, but there's some pretty serious people out there that Republicans and moderates and centrists and certainly and Democrats too all agree are, got something important to say on this issue, and that's the Department of Defense. They have consistently over the years put out reports pointing to the fact that climate change is a big problem, and that it's affecting their operations. And this report, while it was interesting, the report came out, but it was not announced. It was just kind of like hidden, and some reporters started asking about it, and then it got posted, and there's some issues about some things that were not mentioned in the report, but nevertheless, the report did make a very important conclusion that there are potential impacts to missions, operational plans, and installations with climate change. And if you Google it, there's even more stuff out there about where the military is. I neglected to put a title on this. I'm so good at this stuff. But this is basically, boards of directors, countries that have boards of directors that have a serious oversight responsibility in their governance rules about climate change. And you see in the United States, we're not all that great. We're down here, Brazil is even worse because climate change is even a more divisive issue there in some ways. But the point is that business, private sector, is really looking at climate change as a serious problem. And this is just a headline from the New York Times that illustrates that. I didn't include there's an entity called the Bank for International Settlements, and it's the clearinghouse for the central banks like the Federal Reserve, the equivalents of the Federal Reserve all over the world. And they say that put out a report recently that what they call a green swan as opposed to a black swan event. How many people here are in business majors? Are there business majors here? Not many. Well, if you were, there's a finance thing called a black swan event. It's like where something happens that we didn't foresee, and all of a sudden the markets go like this. Well, there's a potential of a green swan event, which is basically a perfect storm, although not necessarily storm, although it probably could be, of climate-related problems, which creates a huge problem for financial markets. BP recently announced that it's going to be carbon neutral by 2050. A lot of people don't really know how they're going to do that because they're going to continue extracting, but they've announced it. They announced it just a few weeks ago, and Delta Airlines did. So there are a lot of companies that are doing a lot more than the U.S. Than the government or other governments. This is just another recent headline. Conservative states, a lot of them in the Southeast, asked the federal government recently for money to deal with the disasters related to climate change, hurricanes, sea levels rising, floods, all those things. But they were all very careful in soliciting funds from the administration not to mention the word climate change. Cities are doing a lot. This is a publication that deals with what cities are doing. This is another group that works worldwide with a group of cities. Cities are major sources of pollution, and we can make some progress. We can't live up to the goals of the Paris Agreement with just cities in the United States and just states like California, New York, although that's helpful. But they can help and work in the states, in the cities, at the local level on climate change issues. Can make a difference. So while I think the divisions and the polarization that we have at the federal level make it very difficult to have progress on climate change and adopting policies that will ameliorate climate change and its impacts, the states and the localities are doing a lot. And that's the most hopeful I can be at the moment. But I do want to take some questions.
Some years ago, a lot of colleges and university students pushed their administrations to divest from businesses that were doing business in South Africa. And I think there's some of that movement's happening now, Harvard, Yale, some of the Ivy League schools. The students are pushing the administration to divest from carbon industries. Do you see that as a potential tool for creating change? I'm kind of a moderate on that stuff. I think
I think it's great. I basically think it's probably good. It's a great idea when students raise hell about anything, because if they're not raising hell, they're not doing anything. So go raise hell. But I'm not sure that as an ultimate policy, I think it would probably be better if you to encourage the university to divest of industries that aren't doing anything. So if you divest of an Exxon or a BP, then you don't have any leverage with them. I think it might be better to stay as an investor, but go to the shareholders meetings and raise hell, and try to get the industries that are not adopting the goals that you need to see to do so, and also to monitor and make sure if BP says it's going to do that, make sure they do what they say they're going to do. So I'm not sure that just withdrawing totally from the portfolio was the right approach. I do think being aggressive about making sure that they do what they should do and that they do what they say they're going to do, because a lot of them are saying they're going to do stuff, but whether they're going to follow through or not, it's you never know, because at the end of the day, they're caught between their shareholders and the larger global good that they say they want to accomplish. Other questions?
That's kind of like a two-part thing. Do you think if we weren't so divided as a nation that we could actually get stuff done, like as far as like the political parties? And if you do believe so, how could we help facilitate?
Well, yeah. I mean, if we were not so divided, first of all, I think we would be able to lead internationally. And the only way you're going to deal with the climate crisis is to work internationally. And one of the things the people who are opposed to doing anything on global warming and climate change, I mean, there's different attitudes out there. Some people just don't believe it. Some people believe it's God's plan, and that's just the way it is. Some people just believe it's weather, and that's the way it is. But there's some people who, yeah, it's happening, yeah, it's man-made, but we're not going to assume ourselves the economic responsibility and take a 0.2% or more off of our GDP in order to deal with the issue, while India and China and other countries are not doing the same. Now, China actually has agreed. Actually, India has to. Actually, a lot of the big countries are where they need to be. We don't have the regimes in place to try to make sure that we're all doing what we say we want to do and meeting the goals. So that's important. So yeah, I think if we could get our act together, we could lead within the international fora, and we could get some rules, and some rules that are enforceable, and some deal with the issue in an international way. How we deal with it is, it's how you deal with any other political problem. You got to go out there and get to work. And basically what is happening, I think, within the political environment in this country, because we are polarized, everybody is self-sorting into groups, and they don't hear other people. And it is happening right now in the Democratic Party on the left with, frankly, folks who tend to support Bernie Sanders and some others. Twitter has probably, Ezra Klein talks about it, he hates Twitter. I mean, you only have about 10% of people out there on Twitter. Twitter isn't really all that big, but it is driving commentary on TV, it's driving commentary podcasts, it's driving debate, but it's a relatively small group of activists and at one end of the spectrum or the other. So I would get out there, it's working locally. I mean, state representatives never hear from anybody, state councilmen, council districts. I mean, if you're in Nashville, getting the city of Nashville to be, which they are doing, but, Nashville can do more in terms of its impact. Murfreesboro could do more. So trying to do work at the local level is important, and then it works its way up.
Going off the previous question, that said that those two parties need to come together and get their act together. In what way would they do that? Because in this case, I'm going to guess that a lot of people would probably support climate change, man-made climate change, but that would mean that one party would probably be wrong in this sense. So then in this case, when they say come together, do we mean like one party admits that they're wrong, we say that they are wrong, or do we compromise?
Well, there are some potential areas of compromise. I'll name a couple of them. One is on nuclear energy, and it's where I have a little bit of a problem sometimes with the left of the environmental movement. I mean, nuclear energy is costly. It's got problems. There are problems with fuel storage, which we have not dealt with, but it doesn't emit greenhouse gases. And one area of compromise that might be possible is, at least for a shorter term, to look at the potential, at least, for some more nuclear power. I will get in trouble with my liberal and more green friends for saying it, but it's certainly something we ought to look at. Senator Alexander has talked a lot about it, and it's something that might get us over a very serious hump that we have over for the next 30 or 40 years, because if we keep going like we're going, we're heading for a train wreck, and we have a problem with renewables in that they don't provide the base load that we need. Conservation is great. We've advanced a lot with battery storage. We've obviously with solar and wind, but base supply in the energy area is a big problem, and that's one other area. The other area is some of the mitigation stuff. I mean, you may or may not believe that it's man-made, but water's coming in over the seawall and flooding the city, and we got to do something about it. And money needs to be spent there to do that. So there are some areas. The fundamental issue of is mankind causing it, is it not, and therefore do we need to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases and get away from fossil fuels. There's probably more. If you talk to average people who are not politicians, they probably could get together. If you go out here on campus and talk to some people, can probably get together on this stuff. They probably think, yeah, it may not all be caused by human activity, but a lot of it is. And I like solar anyway, so why not? I mean, I think there's a way to come to an agreement, but the way we are now, we just sort into our groups, and I don't want to admit that I believe in climate change if I am a conservative Republican, because nobody around me does, and I don't want to be out of my group. This book, Ezra Klein's book, talks a lot about how we sort into groups, and we will sort into groups, and we will give the people that are in our group advantages even when it doesn't make any sense, even when the group is just whether you're red or blue or black or white or green or purple. And you all of a sudden say, well, you're purple. Oh, I'm purple, then I help my purple people, even though it makes no sense. It's a ridiculous group. I mean, people sort into groups and then help their groups, and they don't want to be out of their group. And that's a lot of what's going on. And you have one too.
So one concern that I've had, while I do agree that we need to make some drastic movements towards reducing the effects of climate change, I also have concerns about the economic impact of that, because a lot of what needs to happen is turning over from our original carbon-based system to something totally different. And while we do have more resources available to us than a developing country, I think we are also in a kind of a delicate space with that right now. We have the ability to really hurt our economy.
Well, we can hurt the economy or we can help the economy. I think it's a point well taken, but the investment that we can make in renewable energy and battery storage and all kinds of technologies that would help us deal with the issue of climate change is also going to create a lot of jobs. Now, we have to be smarter than we've been in the past about educating people to be able to take those jobs, and understanding that, a coal miner in West Virginia is not going to move to California and start installing windmills, So that person, that coal miner in California, in West Virginia, we got to figure out a way to help him or her, probably him. We got to figure out how to help them deal with the dislocation that's caused by significantly reducing our reliance on coal. And saying that, oh yeah, well, there's plenty of jobs in California installing windmills, or Texas or wherever. Well, he's not going to do it because his mama's sick and his wife doesn't want to go, and his, so they're not. We got dislocations that are caused in the economy, kind of like has been caused by international trade, that we haven't been smart enough to deal with, because the economists say, oh, don't worry, it'll all take care of itself. Well, it won't take care of itself. We have to deal with it. That's part of what the Green New Deal is about, and I don't think it was rolled out very effective. There were a lot of issues, and of course it was immediately attacked. But to some extent, I mean, if you go and read what the Green New Deal is about, it is about dealing with the economic dislocations that are caused by attempting to go to a carbon neutral or significantly reduced carbon environment. And it will cause dislocations, but it will also create jobs, but the jobs, may not be where they need to be. So we have to create other ways of dealing with that issue, social safety nets, et cetera.
Do you think that with our political system the way it is, that we are even capable of reaching that point, though?
No. No, absolutely not. No, I don't. I am not particularly optimistic. I'm optimistic when I see you guys out there, but I'm not optimistic about my generation and maybe even one or two behind me. We're not in a good position when it comes to agreeing on some things that we need to do. Okay, let me catch her and okay.
I was just going to say, I heard something just last week from Tennessee's former Speaker of the House of Representatives in the Tennessee General Assembly, Speaker Beth Harwell, who was Speaker in the Tennessee Assembly just 2 years ago. So this is not ancient history, and she's now a distinguished visiting professor of political science here at MTSU. And Dr. Harwell said that when she was in the Tennessee House, that when she got 10 emails on a particular subject, she said that was a lot, and she viewed it as a voting mandate. I'm just here to tell you that blew me out of the water, because sometimes I don't email about an issue that I care about because I think, that legislator's not going to respond unless he or she gets 700, and that's my vote doesn't count or my voice doesn't count. She said if she got 10 emails on a subject, she took it as a voting mandate from the state of Tennessee. I thought that little datum was remarkable. So you all could be clustering together to be sending emails from this class to so many people, and you could change the world.
It's true, we take for granted that our opinion doesn't count, and frankly, on some really big issues that get highly polarized, it doesn't, but it can make a difference. You had a...
This is going back on the changing economically question. I grew up in West Virginia, and one of the big jobs that is happening right now is the oil and gas field. And what's happening is people are graduating from high school and getting these jobs in the oil and gas field, and they go from state to state, and they just live in RVs and campers, and they're starting to become these pockets of just RV communities. And if we would, they're very well high-paying jobs too, and if we would put more funding towards better resources like windmills or solar energy and created those jobs at a higher paying price, then do you think that that movement from oil and gas could switch over to a much better and more resourceful energy?
Well, I think there are more people installing windmills in the United States today than there are working in oil and gas. Oil and gas is always a little lumpy depending on oil price, and as I noticed driving down here today, Murfreesboro as always has some of the cheapest gas in the country, or in here, $2.19 a gallon, or $2.09. But yes, I think as we move to other industries, and certainly wind and solar. There are other things going on out there, other technologies being developed. Batteries are a huge part to deal with this base load issue. Yeah, I think so. And also in the extractive industries. I mean, again, I had trouble with some of my friends in the environmental movement. I am not, I don't believe we can shut down fossil fuel production tomorrow. I think coal is, coal's worse than natural gas. Natural gas, methane escapes from natural gas drilling. And there are technologies that can capture it and deal with it, but there's not a significant financial incentive to do that. So one of the things we need to do in the extractive industries is the one that you're talking about, where folks go from West Virginia to North Dakota to Oklahoma. We need more technology to deal with especially methane escape in in those industries. Now, some people are going to say, well, we just need to shut down fracking altogether. That's what some of the Democrat candidates who are running for president believe that. But there are others who believe, no, we can't do that because natural gas has its problems. The escape of methane related to natural gas is a huge problem. But there are technologies that would deal with it. And by the way, what that means is that on a drilling platform, you're going to probably hire 2 or 3 more people because they got to do the technology related to preventing the methane escape. So these innovations create jobs. They do cost some up front because you got to do the research and you got to train people and you got to make the capital investment, but all that creates jobs, and I think that's part of what gets lost sometime. And I think it gets lost because it's change. And the country's has gone through a lot of change lately. We're changing demographically. And I think people react to that the way most people react to change, which is to step back and react with a little bit of fear. And I think that's a natural human reaction. I don't think people who react that way are evil people. I think they're doing what people do. They're reacting in a conservative and in a cautious way to a world and a country that's changing beyond what their vision can see. So I think it's perfectly normal.
I think it's also worth saying in response to the cost question that the estimation of the cost of catastrophic climate change far out exceed what we would have to pay in order to.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and also that the switching away from fossil fuel technology has co-benefits which reduce costs in other domains like particulate matter and that lead to health effects. So getting off of coal really.
Yeah, we get hung up on greenhouse gas emissions, but the particulate emissions from diesel and that sort of thing, and most people can, regardless where they are on the issue of climate change, they really don't want their kids going outside and getting asthma because there's all this particulate. And that's another place, getting back to an earlier question. Forget climate change. Do you really want your kids to get asthma because the air is really bad? And so I think there are those areas we can work on. And certainly, we don't see it as much here. We suffer through last September was miserably hot. Was that climate change? Maybe, I don't know. It could be. I think we had 90-degree days in October. But if you live on the coast, you really see it in the end. You can't say any specific hurricane is caused by climate change, but the increasing intensity and the regularity of hurricanes that are more and more and more intense, even one in the North Atlantic, essentially a winter cyclone in the North Atlantic that's just kicking the heck out of England and Scotland, or Wales, I guess it is. I mean, the intensity of these storms is really increasing. Now, beautiful weather outside. It's the middle of February. Who's to complain? But the problem is that it's much bigger than one day or one event. I guess we're getting close to the end.